Good morning. Welcome, all 170 of you in our audience, to From Oil and Gas to Energy Integration on this, the second day of the Dcarbonise Week Virtual Sustainability Summit, a pre-COP26 event that features some of next month's milestone event sponsors and a host of true luminaries on highly topical and relevant panels. I'm Judith Patton, Project Director and co-creator of All Energy. I don't look like that, actually. That's Scott, but that's neither here nor there. With no impersonal energy since 2019, we've run a compelling series of webinars, 30 between May 2020 and March of this year. Over 18,000 registered and received over 20,000 views. We had a packed virtual conference rooms yesterday for day one, and today looks well set for success as well. One tiny housekeeping fact. Check out what lies behind the resources tab. You can see what is coming up next, a full program link, the digital bag, and information on next May's All Energy. It's 11th and 12th of May for your diary. And at Glasgow's SEC, live at last. Naturally, we'd like to thank our sponsors. For the first 3 days, these include our brand sponsors, Scottish Power, Shepherd and Wedderburn, and Ørsted, whose names you'll see alongside certain sessions close to their hearts. And our session sponsors, Hitachi ABB Power Grids, Kellis Midstream, SSEN Transmission, SWEP, and Driving the Electric Revolution Industrialization Centres. They must have very big business cards. And thank you for being with us today, audience and speakers. And if you enjoy the session, let us know, and also let your colleagues know that they can watch on demand. Now, without more ado, I'd like to pass over to Claire Mack, Chief Executive of Scottish Renewables, to get the show on the road. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you again for the opportunity to come and be part of the All Energy virtual programme, the Dcarbonise programme. Perfect timing as ever as we run up into COP, and things are really starting to gather pace, as we know. So really starting to get very, very exciting. And this is a brilliant session because this one really does bring together the absolute essence of COP, you know, the energy transition and how we manage the technology, the people, the nature-based solutions and the finance to genuinely push the energy transition forward and to take us to where we need to be, which is, of course, net zero. So this session entitled From Oil and Gas to Energy and Energy Integration is really very heavily focused on the technology and the innovation that's going to come together, that's going to really make us one energy industry in the vibe that All Energy has put forward for a long number of years. So opportunities definitely on both sides, of course, in terms of decarbonisation being absolutely essential for the oil and gas sector, not just across processes, but obviously in the future across product, and of course opening up new partnerships, new markets for us as basically from the offshore wind sector and obviously into the future into the floating offshore wind sector. So some really exciting times ahead, and we've seen some great stuff obviously from our sector in terms of cost reduction, and the hope being that these new partnerships will just drive that ever more quickly, that cost reduction and innovation as we go. I've got an absolutely phenomenal panel. So I'm going to do some very, very quick introductions. Nobody really wants to hear any more of me speaking, of course. You want to get into this session, but we've got some great panelists here, of course, spanning the licensing and consenting regimes and the regulatory regimes, technology, training and skills, and of course that wider innovation picture as well, which is utterly important, which is about the off-takers as well, you know, wider industrial decarbonisation too. So we're going to have a brilliant chat today. Our first speaker will be Scott Robertson, who's Director of Operations for the OGA, of course responsible for the OGA's exploration, production, energy transition and technology agenda. Can't wait to hear from you, Scott. And we also have Luca Carradi from the Innovation Network Director from the newly renamed Net Zero Technology Centre, who are there to connect innovators and organisations across sectors and disciplines to explore technology solutions for the energy transition, including, of course, CCUS. We've then got Andy Williamson, who's head of energy transition at APITO, the global not-for-profit skills body for the energy industry, looking at standards and qualifications, as well as workforce development, truly important at the heart of the energy transition, of course, in terms of people. And finally, we'll hear from Bryony Livesey, Challenge Director, Challenge being industrial decarbonisation at the UK Research and Innovation, UKRI, running the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, £170 million worth of programme there, which has also drawn 261 million in from match funding from industry to help decarbonise heavy industry, which again is just such an exciting place to be and somewhere that we're all genuinely keen to see acceleration come forward. So I will stop there, having introduced my fantastic panel, and let's start to hear from them. So Scott, you're first up. Scott, are you perhaps on mute? Can I ask you to unmute?
Yes, thank you, Claire. Marianne, could I have the first slide up, please? Okay, right, so let's get started. So oil and gas is rightly under the spotlight. The climate change crisis is very real, and the need to undertake an energy transition is very, very clear. And in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to show you that the oil and gas sector is very much in action, playing its part in delivering the energy transition and reducing its own emissions. It's worth highlighting that during the energy transition, we still need a secure domestic supply of oil and gas. We can't just switch oil and gas off. However, the UK is a province very much in decline, as you can see from the darker lines on those charts. We can't replace our oil and gas at the rate that the UK consumes it, even in the forecast consumption scenarios from the Independent Climate Change Committee report. And remember, we need oil and gas not just for energy and transportation, but for things like pharmaceuticals, plastics and clothing, everyday life essentials. However, while the UK still needs oil and gas in an energy transition, we in the OGA and industry are actively working to reduce the sector's emissions profile by reducing emissions from power, flaring and venting, and I'll cover that briefly. So next slide, thank you. So back in 2019, the OGA, working with some of our regulatory partners, Ofgem and the Crown Estate, we had a vision. We knew the potential of the North Sea, or the UK continental shelf, to give it its Sunday name. We knew the UK continental shelf had a lot of potential. And with the government's net zero 2050 target in mind, we estimated in this vision that the continental shelf could deliver about 60% of the emissions abatement that we needed or need, with 30% of that coming from energy integration technology, i.e. using existing incumbent infrastructure and reducing emissions on the incumbent position. The map on the right-hand side just shows you that we're very much in action. So there are 3 of those blue boxes are carbon capture and storage licenses that have been issued and are now actively working towards getting approvals sometime in the early to mid 2020s. And you'll also see reference to a backed-in hydrogen project that's up and running with the potential to be a hydrogen source for the southeast of England, and working on some activity in the Shetland Islands as well. So everything, electrification of oil and gas hubs, carbon capture and storage with associated blue hydrogen. Next slide. Now, the North Sea Transition Deal is really important in the energy transition. It's a cast iron commitment between government and the industry to move beyond oil and gas through a well-managed energy transition. And it's the first of a kind for a G7 country. The deal's all about bridging from fossil fuels to net zero, and you'll see that it commits to 16 billion of new investment in things like carbon capture and storage, electrification of existing oil and gas production, and a large investment in hydrogen as we look to grow the hydrogen market. Now, these are all vital solutions recognised by the Independent Climate Change Committee that advises the government. And the oil and gas sector, with the existing infrastructure, subsurface expertise, large capitalisation and readily used supply chain, is very, very well placed to lead this. So what does the transition deal do? As well as committing that investment, it also commits the oil and gas sector to reducing its own native emissions whilst it produces oil and gas. And you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner the targets that the industry has agreed to, reducing throughout the 2020s as we head through 2030 towards 2050. And the OGA, we're the guardians of that deal. We are here to monitor industry and ensure that they achieve their targets. The social licence to operate for the industry is genuinely under threat. So not delivering on these targets or these investments is not an option, frankly. Next slide, Maya. I talked about electrification of oil and gas hubs. It's critical to meeting those targets, and they're replicated down the left-hand side of this slide. So while we need oil and gas, it's important that we do it as cleanly as possible, and that means reducing the emissions from power generation on the oil and gas platforms and reducing the amount of flaring and venting that is largely related to safety. So we're in action. We are working to reduce flaring and venting emissions, and we're also working with a number of operators on schemes to electrify oil and gas hubs. And they're very good schemes progressing in the Outer Moray Firth. So that's the part of the North Sea to the north of Aberdeen and to the east of Inverness, and in the central North Sea, which is the part you can see in the map on the right-hand side. And there are now concepts genuinely progressing that look to take power from shore or even integration with offshore floating wind to power oil and gas projects. The most all of this is the challenge the offshore oil and gas sector has is actually an opportunity to accelerate offshore floating wind growth. And there's a real opportunity that the oil and gas sectors need in the short term can provide a long-term lasting legacy of electrification infrastructure that can be used to benefit future generations of floating offshore wind. We as regulators are responding to this. The INTOG, the Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas Wind Leasing regime, has been announced by the Crown Estate Scotland, and we're working very closely with them to see how we can maximise this opportunity and accelerate offshore wind growth. Next slide. I talked about carbon capture storage earlier. The Climate Change Committee report recognises this is key to the UK meeting its objectives and targets. The blue line on the chart shows what the Climate Change Committee estimates that the UK needs in terms of carbon capture and storage, and the yellow bars show the OGA's estimate of what we can achieve with the existing carbon capture and storage licences that we have issued. And the great news is we're already on track to deliver the Prime Minister's 10-point plan of 10 million tonnes per annum by 2030. And in fact, we're making great progress to delivering the Climate Change Committee's recommendation of over 20 million tonnes per annum. Where we've got the gap is beyond that and reaching out to the 2050s. But we are still receiving approaches for licensing further good carbon capture stores, and we're working on those. So we're really keen. The pictures at the bottom are the reality. These are the schemes that are already progressing. So many of you may have heard of Acorn project in St Fergus, HyNet in the Liverpool Basin, and the North Endurance Partnership carbon capture storage scheme that ultimately aims to take carbon dioxide from the Humber and the Teesside industrial clusters. So highly active in this. Next slide. But all of this is happening in the North Sea. It's become real prime energy transition real estate. Many of you will just see it as a vast sea, but it's becoming a really crowded place. This is a map from the OGA's Interactive Energy Integration website, and that shows the oil and gas fields, the wind leasing rounds, and one of the carbon capture and storage licence areas. So having much closer interactions with myself and our other regulators, spatial planning of how this all fits together is absolutely key to a successful energy transition. The pace of change, as Claire indicated, is rapid, and it will accelerate as investment ramps up, as technology improves, and as oil and gas demand declines. So it's incredible, quite incredible the pace this is happening at. So hopefully, in that brief presentation, I've reassured you that the vision we had in 2019 is now very much a reality. And actually, I'm delighted to be bringing my expertise in this space to make sure the oil and gas sector reduces its emissions, helps the government achieve the UK targets, and plays its role in accelerating the opportunities for renewables and clean energy, such as wind and hydrogen, in an integration. And we'll get to net zero, certainly in 2050, but hopefully sooner. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. We're going to just take all the inputs from our panel as we go forth. So we're now going to introduce Luca Corradi, Innovation Network Director from the Net Zero Technology Centre. Thank you, Luca. Take it away. And Luca, I think you might be on mute.
Ever done that as well. My apologies. Okay, thank you very much. I'll kick off then. I'd like to start on the same vein as Scott, talking about the vision, and quote as he did the Committee on Climate Change. And actually, I would like to praise for the amazing work they're doing, because it's really informing the strategy and the direction toward net zero of the UK. So taking some data from the CCC about the projection of demand for electricity and for power, for energy as a whole in 2050. This is taken from the further ambition scenarios. What we see there is we get a sense of the energy mix today and the future energy mix from a demand perspective. And we see a massive growth for renewable, for electricity, which is fantastic news. And we see also oil, which is the red on the right side, going down, although gas, the blue, doesn't go down so much. So I think the point is that getting to net zero requires a lot of renewables, but requires that we deal with that emission from the gas side. So decarbonising gas, which involve hydrogen and carbon capture and sequestration. And that's where the integration word becomes key, because if I move to the next slide, okay. Because we're moving from the image on the left, you can see there, where oil and gas and renewables with the red and the green pipeline are clearly separate sector and separate industries. They even have separate regulation, although, Scott mentioned the effort which is being done in harmonizing them, and even separate the supply chains, at least until recently. And we're moving from that scenario, from that situation, actually, to the scenario on the right, which is an integrated energy system where the sectorial borders are likely to be blurred. And we already see that happening with the international oil companies becoming integrated energy companies, the supply chain diversifying, and so on. And this is what came out from two pieces of work we did at the Net Zero Technology Centre in the past months, which you see on the left, those two reports. One on the top, which we did in collaboration with the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, is the Integrated Energy Vision for 2050. And therefore outlining what does the North Sea look like to be an integrated net zero energy basin. And the second report on the bottom is instead looking at the technology gap. So do we have that technology to make this happen? And the answer is yes, we do have it to start. There's a lot to innovate though. And so that report is analyzing where that innovation can happen. So it is a much more diverse and integrated scenario than it is so far, where the technology play a big role for making it happen. And I won't go into the detail of this slide, but you can see the titles there: offshore wind, carbon capture, reducing the cost, resilience, and export, and of course jobs. And so let me get into this table, which summarizes the work we did in the integrated energy vision, which shows different ways to achieve net zero in the North Sea. So you see the situation as today, 2020, and the three scenario: emerging, progressive, and transformational. And the difference lies in the different combination of green and blue hydrogen, basically all green in the transformational, mostly blue in the emerging, for example, and the quantity of residual oil and gas in the mix, and therefore associated CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, required to capture those emissions. What the report highlights, I think, is all this requires investment, which generates returns. So there's a return for the economy, you can see there in the top, but is also a return in terms of securing and protecting jobs and reducing the import dependencies. And I mentioned the other report, which is the closing the gap. That is looking at what are the key technology gaps that we should focus our innovation effort on. And what you see here is ultra smart, short summary. I won't go into the detail. Some technology gaps in the various areas. Oil and gas for decarbonizing and reducing the operational emissions. Let's talk about in offshore wind, taking also leveraging and learning from the experience of oil and gas in its supply chain. And of course, a lot of innovation that can happen in the area of captured carbon and storage and hydrogen, which are still relatively new and emerging technologies. So this is what we're working on at the Net Zero Technology Center. This is our roadmap, which can probably be summarized in these three bubbles here. So in green is reducing emissions, and orange that integration word again, integrating and creating that integration between the various sectors and the various technologies. And of course, let's not forget the important role of a digital solution, of what we call offshore energy 4.0, in making that happen, in optimizing, and especially on the efficiency and on the productivity side. And of course, the second popular word after integration is collaboration. And we cannot do this alone, because net zero that will not happen within sector borders or even country borders. Hydrogen, to make an example, requires an end-to-end strategy. How do we connect the generation to the consumption and the transport in the middle to make a hydrogen economy? But that's just an example. Everything else is somehow connected. And as I said, the North Sea doesn't stop at the borders, and the atmosphere even less. And that's why it has to be a collaborative effort. So integration and collaboration, I think, are the key words to making Net Zero happen. And I think it can be done. And as a Net Zero Technology Center, we exist to help achieving it by transforming the energy industry with technology driving that transition. And I look forward to the panel discussion, and I think I'm handing over to Andy or Claire now. Thank you.
Over to Andy it is now. Thank you. So Andy Williamson, from Head of Energy Transition from APITO. Do you want to pick up with your presentation there? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Can you see me okay? Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. It's a real honor to be representing APITO at this webinar. So I guess from our perspective, we've heard a lot about technology integration. We've heard about market dynamics and the challenge of the transition. From APITO's perspective, it's people, which are really important here. This is the common denominator going forward. And for those of you who may not be familiar with APITO, we are the global not-for-profit skills and standards body for the energy industry. APITO has been supporting the workforce now for more than 5 decades. We're represented in 50 countries worldwide, and we are keeping people safe, predominantly in the oil and gas industry. Around about 400,000 people a year are trained to APITO standards through 325 accredited centres. So that heritage and our contribution to the energy industry, we see as a really good means to support the energy transition. So why do we have an energy transition team? Predominantly because our shareholders and stakeholders are also looking at diversification. They're looking at an integrated energy strategy. Therefore, we are there effectively to help support and deliver the net zero workforce of the future in partnership and through collaboration. APITO recognise the significant growth of renewables and the number of jobs that will be created, not just in the UK, but globally. So we are effectively trying to make it easier for the workforce to transition in an integrated energy economy and move between different parts of the sector. So the idea of having a mobile workforce is very much at the heart of what we are doing. So what are we doing? Effectively, we're collaborating with many of the key stakeholders. Most of the people on this call, we're collaborating with the trade associations, with government, with industry, to create that integrated skills strategy. A major part of what we're doing is effectively supporting the delivery of the North Sea transition deal, which Scott's already alluded to. So APITO, we're effective in forming the Energy Skills Alliance, which is a leadership group, and we're taking a key role through the ESA, working in partnership with OG UK, Renewable UK, Scottish Renewables, and other key stakeholders to help shape and deliver that North Sea transition deal. What APITO are effectively leading on is the development and delivery of a People and Skills Action Plan. And the People and Skills Action Plan is effectively there to support government and industry in meeting the objectives of workforce transition and development. The People and Skills Action Plan will look at the recognition for common standards to help the workforce to transition, for the supply chain to be cost effective as they work across different parts of the energy sector, to encourage the development of apprenticeship frameworks which fit the needs of a future workforce and allow for that mobility, to look at supply and demand around skills, not just the transition of workers in oil and gas, but to look at what skills may be needed in the future, many of which we actually don't know what they are as yet. We are really keen to strengthen the connection between the aging workforce in oil and gas and new entrants. There is a lot of work in train and already in the market to support the future generation of workforce and to manage the dilemma for new entrants, the younger generation coming into the energy industry who are very climate change savvy. They may not want to work in oil and gas, but we're trying to present more positive visibility around an energy industry that is attractive. And this is not about either or, oil and gas or renewables. We're looking at this through the eyes of people and both sectors. This is about oil and gas and renewables. We will have oil and gas for many decades to come, and it will need certainly the current workforce and indeed more if we are to realise and create the jobs to satisfy transition around floating offshore wind, hydrogen, etc. So there are a number of key work streams that we're leading on to develop and deliver this People and Skills Action Plan with industry and government. And as I iterated at the start, this is all about people, and APITO is there to keep people safe, to keep them skilled, to develop innovative standards in collaboration, to reduce the need for duplication and cost, and to help the industry grow. And if we can support key sectors like offshore wind, who've demonstrated phenomenal cost reduction, if we can help meet the capacity demands in some of these new industries whilst protecting the oil and gas workforce, then we'll consider that a job well done. Thanks for listening, and I'd be delighted to take any questions in due course.
Thank you very much, Andy. Really, really good to come back to that reminder of one of the key drivers, of course, of both of our sectors, which is, of course, the people who sit at the heart of them. So our final panellist, very excited to introduce Bryony Livesey. Bryony, please do tell us more about your work with the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I lead the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, which is about £500 million of public and industry investment in decarbonising some of our major industrial regions. We have a strong focus on developing carbon capture and storage infrastructure and also hydrogen production and distribution at full scale. I think all of us recognise that we need an energy system with a clear recognition of the role that all the elements of that system can play, and make sure we maximise the value of those. And as part of that, I fully recognise the Committee on Climate Change's advice that carbon capture and storage is a necessity for the energy system and not an option. And I feel that it will be helpful if we really recognise this as part of the energy debate, and kind of trust each other that we are actually treating that as part of the energy system rather than kind of all of it, I guess. So fortunately, I think the projects that we are supporting through the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge are demonstrating every day that they fully recognise that the energy system is the important thing. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of work that's going on. So we have energy experts, of course, operating these projects, and their job is to maximise the value of, for example, offshore wind to their project. And so what I would say is that in addition to keeping people like Scott very busy applying for offshore CO2 storage licenses, our projects are also busy looking at how to integrate particularly offshore wind into their project plans. So I was going to give you just a couple of quick examples in Humber and in the Northwest, recognising that we'll be hearing from Scotland Cluster later in the conference. So in Humber, we have a number of things going on, and as examples, we can see Uniper working to develop renewable energy based on the Hornsey wind farm for hydrogen production that would be powering projects locally in the Humber. And we can also see Phillips 66 refinery in the Humber region, which is already planning for local production of hydrogen to use in decarbonising part of its processes. And then they are in turn working with Ørsted on the base funded Gigastack project, which many of you will know something about, where they're planning to deliver hydrogen to the Phillips 66 site, and working with obviously the offshore wind farm and ITM Power to develop that part of the project as part of the broader aspiration to decarbonise that part of the Humber industrial cluster. And then similarly in the Northwest, what we can see is Eni as the offshore operator for the Liverpool Bay platforms, actively studying how offshore wind can provide power to one of the offshore platforms to use as part of the compression process, which is necessary for getting the carbon dioxide gas permanently stored offshore. So I think we can see that we are genuinely moving to recognising all parts of the energy system and utilising different elements where most appropriate. And I'm expecting to see that continue as these projects move to construction and operation. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bryony. And that just brings us to the end of our presenter inputs. We've obviously got the opportunity for you as the audience to put forward some questions. We've already got some there, so I'm just making this plea now for you to put your questions up into that chat function for us to have a look at. We've raised some really, really interesting issues here and lots of common threads that are sitting across here, but no less the fact that we are actually on the cusp of a new era of energy in the North Sea, or what was the UK continental shelf with its Sunday name, which is truly exciting. You know, we've got this opportunity to optimize things, this reset moment to optimize our kind of infrastructures and our frameworks. And I suppose we've got a couple of questions in the chat. One of Adrian Gregory has presented us with one which I think is really quite interesting, because I was looking, Scott, I think as you were talking, and you too, Luca, when you were talking about, you know, the deep commitments that have come through, obviously through the North Sea Transition Deal around emissions reduction, you know, and I know that, as you know, from my own sector, you know, some of these things in the way that they work, you know, you have your low-hanging fruit, and then there are things that are much more difficult to do, you know, and in renewables, you know, the electricity part we've been massively successful at, but moving on to heat and transport, much more complex. And I imagine it's very much the same here, because you've got 25% by 2027, then 50% by 2030. You know, that's the big leap in a small number of years. And what Adrian Gregory had asked about that reductions pathway, possibilities for acceleration within there as well. So I'm interested in how we do that. that. I think that's a sort of first question, and then there's a bit of a secondary one after that, which is around how that might happen, whether that is to do with technology innovation or is it process innovation? Because again, one of the key things that I read through from renewables is that one of our key challenges is accelerating consenting processes, which is not necessarily you can create the best kit in the world, but with those processes, you know, taking longer than everybody wants them to at the moment, we need to work on that. So I'm going to probably come first of all to you, Scott. Actually, I'll come back to you on this one. It's just, what does that reductions pathway look like, and are there options for acceleration in there? Are you thinking about that from a regulatory point of view, or is that being driven by sort of collaboration and whatnot?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So it happens in two fronts, and what we call brownfield, which is how do the existing facilities reduce emissions through better practices, more efficient ways of operating, and just frankly changing the culture compared to how it may have been for the last 30 years. So certainly I am seeing changes in the culture across the basin of the way offshore platforms work, where reducing emissions is now as integral a part of the way they operate as is optimizing how much oil and gas they produce on a day. So you have people offshore genuinely thinking about what they're doing and how they minimize the emissions impact. So we're seeing flaring rates coming down, and you've seen that in the OGA's recent reports, and other mechanisms for reducing venting, and running less power turbines at the same time rather than having, so all of that's in action. Then you get to the capital spend, i.e. what can we then spend large sums of money on to make material further changes? And that's where electrifying offshore hubs, like they've been doing in Norway for some time, either from power from shore or using integration with wind. How do we accelerate that? It is happening. The whole ESG agenda and the importance of companies reporting, their not just profits and financials, but environmental and social elements in their governance. That's accelerating organizations' progress in reducing emissions. So there's a lot happening, and it will be a combination of brownfield efficiency and what we call greenfield capital spend, backed up by cultural change that's going on across all the organizations.
Thank you, Scott. Luca, do you want to pick that one up as well? Because you're obviously sitting right at the forefront of a number of really strong innovation kind of projects, largely in that technology space. We've got a lot of questions in there, and I think we've dealt with the flaring one. It's very much dealt within the transition deal itself. It's a key priority. I think industry's done that. But a lot of technology-based questions around sort of reuse of infrastructure for geothermal, other options and opportunities in there too. Can you talk at that wider level about what you're thinking and seeing in that innovation space that might help just accelerate that carbon?
Sure. I want to reinforce the point you made, actually, Claire, about innovation is not only technology; it comes in the process or in the business models or incentive or the consenting scheme and speed and etc. All of that is required, I think, to accelerate. On our part, of course, we're looking at all possible technology solutions. And when it comes to flaring, for example, there's a question on flaring. The point is, trying to find the technology that actually eliminates the need for flaring, and the second, also that can intervene and reduce the impact of it. The reuse of platform is an interesting one, right? Because it attracts fantasy also. I remember years ago there was mention of hotels, reusing platform for hotels, and I wonder who would like to spend the night on top of a hydrocarbon basin. But I think more reasonable the role of the oil and gas infrastructure as a whole in that energy system that we were talking about before is an important one, and so that is. Has an element of technology innovation. Can we repurpose some of the platform to host DC converter for the renewable industry, for example, which is probably a much more direct and visible opportunity. Geothermal, we are looking at geothermal. We're looking at geothermal as potentially a way to decarbonize oil and gas by reusing the heat that comes from the well. Geothermal as electricity production made offshore as few more challenges because of that heat needs to be maintained and transported, and it tends to lose that heat on the way. So, and can you produce? But all solutions, I think, are there. What we do, we're looking at the various technology readiness levels. So some of those are higher technology readiness level, something that we can implement and deploy in the short term, and that might help accelerate. And some other are more blue sky thinking, and they're part of the context and the things that we look at, because some may be disruptive and bring something new. So in short, there's a variety of technology innovation we can look at, but I would like to reinforce again your point of that has to come together with innovation in the process, in the commercial model, in the regulatory environment as well.
Claire, would you mind if I came in on one other point? Because one really soft element that I see accelerating things is, the renewables sector didn't necessarily talk to the oil and gas sector until, let's say, 1 year or 18 months ago. And, the OGA, we worked really hard to make introductions and bring the two sectors together because we saw the opportunity. And I'm delighted to see how much interaction is now happening between the two sectors. And that is only continuing to increase as everyone recognizes the opportunity. And I think that's accelerating it. So there is a role for organizations like ours to make introductions, and a bit like, we've had workshops where we've brought them together, highlighted the prize.
Absolutely, and I think it is collaboration hugely important. And I've got a big question on collaboration coming up on that, Scott. So hold that thought for one moment, because I want to just very quickly come to Bryony, just to round off that point around process versus kind of technology innovation, because I'm really keen on your view of this, because you're looking, I assume, more widely across different industrial sectors as well, and just keen on where you think the balance is there then between sort of technology and actually process innovations. Oh, I think you're on mute, Bryony.
It's not an easy question to answer. I do think that I'm completely convinced that the fact that we're getting on with these projects and actually doing things will lead to new innovations. So just the fact you're doing something leads to things you haven't thought about, and that is so important. But I think also we're learning so much about the processes we need to adopt and sharing information around those. So within the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, we've always recognised that one of the crucial things we need to do to get costs down for everybody, not least for the people who are going to pay for these processes, is to share the knowledge that we have. And although some elements of new technologies might be commercially sensitive, how you apply to the regulator and get your case through is probably not that commercially sensitive, and let's learn from each other. So I think that process innovation, doing things smarter, learning from each other is really, really important element of what we're trying to do now.
I absolutely agree, and I see it all across the renewables sector too. We spent years pulling together some amazing data around our oceans, which obviously the oil and gas sector's done too, and we need somewhere to bring all that together, because I think that very much sits at the heart of that process innovation in terms of consenting. So that really neatly segues us into that second question that I had around competition and collaboration. We've talked a lot about and not versus, and I think that that's a really key kind of theme that's coming through from this session, is that there's a time and a place for competition. We are all aware of it, and I think we keep talking a bit about collaboration and how do we generate it, and when, and how do we kind of put the words to the tune, because people talk a lot about collaboration, we talk a lot about being able to work together and bringing together kind of ideas, and I think, Scott, you talked a little bit there about introducing people. Of course, that's the first step in collaboration, but then moving on, you need motivations and you need tools and all that kind of stuff. And I think net zero and energy transition is a clear kind of motivating driver in there. So key question, I guess, here is how do you generate the right kind of levels of collaboration, when the time is right, and when is the time right, I guess, for us to look to a more sort of competitive edge to sort of drive more kind of cost reduction. Andy, I'm actually going to start with you on that one, from a sort of Opito perspective, because it feels to me that probably the skills piece is an area of natural collaboration, and is that where we should sort of focus our energies, as the ones that are obvious, and to start there and then move forward, or have you got a different view?
No, I think I'd echo, what Scott said about collaboration seems to be becoming more real. Our sense is that there is a recognition now that it is about and it's not either or. I think when we look at the targets, which are pretty astonishing, the progress to date is astonishing, but the targets now in the UK and globally, particularly around wind and now hydrogen, are eye-watering. And I think it's not so much a skills issue, it's a capacity issue which we need to address, but it's how we galvanize the best of that existing capacity and drive shared learning and understanding to try and meet these targets. The North Sea is a fantastic story. It's an incredibly successful story globally, and Pito's ability to support the oil and gas industry worldwide in 50 countries is as a result of what we've done best in the North Sea. So I think if we can, bring people together and bring the best skills, technology and expertise together to develop where we have, a need for common understanding, then we can really start to accelerate some of the development. And it is all about people, and floating offshore wind is a fantastic opportunity for the oil and gas sector to to support that development. A gigawatt seems a little bit small when you consider the Prime Minister is now talking about 60 gigawatts of wind a year. That will make the North Sea extremely busy. But if we aspire to 12 gigawatts in the UK, there is an awful lot of subsea technology, expertise, and UK excellence which can be deployed into floating offshore wind, and that will only come through oil and gas and renewables collaboration. I think we need an understanding that there are differences, and we see that through some of the common standards. There are differences between oil and gas and offshore renewables, and when we think about the standards that are required, there needs to be a greater degree of collaboration and understanding around common standards, because that way we can take cost out of the industry and we can help to accelerate development. So yes, I think there is definitely a change in the approach to collaboration now. It is starting to happen. It needs to continue. I think if the UK is to replicate the success of North Sea oil and gas, and we take the transition deal globally, because as the first G7 country to do it, this is a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and it's something, to be rightly proud of. And it is, we don't want to lose that North Sea brand in the process, because it's a big thing. It's a big thing, and it is globally recognised. Luca, I'm going to come to you because obviously we talked a little bit there about people and skills and collaboration. Interested in your view on the sort of technological collaborations and how can we drive them, because that's always been really problematic, hasn't it? People want to keep stuff to themselves because maybe it might be the secret sauce, or it might be, it might be the next Google. How do you drive collaboration in the technology space?
That's a very good point, and actually part of the reason we as a technology center exist. It is to drive that collaboration in the sector. And I think it comes to the point of de-risking and de-costing. And in the energy transition, in the road to net zero, there's a lot of technology that is at the early stages, and there's a lot of opportunity to reduce the cost through innovation, right? And so all the focus, I think, on the collaboration when technology innovation comes into the pre-competitive stage. So how do we progress together at technology to the next stage? And then there might be different way of applying that or delivering that solution, which are based on the same technology. So, the pre-competitive element where government investment or much funding from government or combining investment from different operators or different players can achieve that acceleration, which everybody's looking for. So it is proven to accelerate. So I think that's where it comes into place when you look at the collaboration between companies. But there's a couple of points that you raise here. One is the collaboration between sectors, between oil and gas, between hydrogen, between and renewables, for example. And I go back to the point of integration there, because that's an opportunity. So why should I collaborate from an operator with renewables? Well, because there's an opportunity to work together, integrate, and therefore accelerate the decarbonization and the performance of both sectors at the same time. So that's I think is an important thing. And finally, and I think there was a question somewhere, but someone mentioned the element of international collaboration. As I said before, it is a global challenge, of course, net zero. And so there is an element of competition, but there is clearly an element of knowledge exchange, exchanging notes. How do we progress each other? How do we help each other progressing faster towards net zero? If I can make an example, COP26 coming up is, of course, a big place for collaboration. And we are having a global summit of technology centers like ours from around the world. So to share that vision and to say, okay, this is what we think in the North Sea. And I think we are ahead, but we will find out. What do you think? What are the technologies that other places are investing? And is there an opportunity to co-invest or to share knowledge so that we can all benefit to accelerate the development of new technology?
Fantastic. Yeah, we've got some questions about not necessarily international collaboration, but that international picture, which I think we'll come to, because I'm trying to combine some of the questions. We've got a lot coming in, so I'm going to talk a little bit. Adam Cadona, you've got a question around about driving storage within the North Sea. I think Martin Allen as well, thinking about the development of CCS and hydrogen. Both really, we know really important, non-optional. That's the kind of terminology that's being used. However, when do you think we will start to see that picture emerge about scale of use and the sort of demand levels for these, which will genuinely help us to sort of build that wider integrated energy vision picture out, with a lot more certainty? You've got some government targets in there, which are great. They're great for driving. But then at some point we'll hand over to industry, who will of course drive the development of a number of that. Just interested across the panel in your views about what will be the key milestones along those kind of development journeys, that when we'll get to sort of understand a bit more about the scale of what CCS and hydrogen will mean in that broader picture. Bryony, can I come to you first on that?
Thank you. I think probably Scott will have a more informed view on this, but I would say that I don't feel we're in a position yet to come to a really informed view on this, because I think we have to recognise that the energy system itself is extremely complicated. We don't know exactly what we can deliver by when in some of the targets we've set ourselves. And then we have to think about the energy system's interaction with other things that affect us getting to net zero. And that is a whole extra level of complexity. So some of the things that might be right for the energy system might not suit other parts of the country. So clearly, if we wanted to have an energy system with lots and lots of onshore wind, we couldn't then plant lots and lots of trees in those same places. So we need to recognise all of these links. And I don't personally feel that we're quite at the point to make a decision, but I'm sure that the OGA are looking at it as much as anybody is. So perhaps Scott could answer the question a bit more fully.
Great. Scott?
Sure. Yeah, so just on the last point, one important point of collaboration that gets back to your previous thing, Claire, was we're collaborating like we've never done with the other regulators. So I've been in the OGA nearly 6 years since it was formed. And in the early days, I can't remember talking to the Crown Estate Scotland or the Crown Estate or Ofgem. I'm doing that almost every other day now. So there is real collaboration there as we try and break down barriers. Going back to your other point, evidence of scale. So hopefully the chart I showed earlier in my slides highlights that we are beginning to see scale, really happening on carbon capture and storage. We have actively now 3 licenses. We are stewarding them. I have people in my team working with the joint ventures of those to make sure they're making progress as per the conditions of the license. And we expect that a number of them will come to sanction decisions, in the next couple of years. And that's, key milestones towards the next phase of progress. We continue to receive new applications for licenses for carbon capture and storage because, there's a recognition that it's an opportunity and that there is the capability and capacity and finance. So that's further evidence of scale and activity. There's a lot of money being spent now by joint ventures progressing carbon capture and storage licenses. On hydrogen, it's probably still a bit early. We're creating the conditions for hydrogen, but there's a few things still to happen to determine whether it's commencing at scale. But in terms of carbon capture and storage, very much so. And in terms of electrification of the offshore oil and gas platforms, as I said, there are 2 schemes really beginning to progress now. So I'm comfortable we're seeing everything. I'd like it to happen faster, frankly, but I am seeing progress at scale now.
That's really, really good to hear. Luca, could you pick up at that point and talk about your view of where, just in terms of timelines and where a more solid a picture might emerge from your perspective in terms of CCS and hydrogen?
No, I think I will echo the point that Byron made, right? Which is the we're going back to the integration element, because this technology and these solutions do not exist in isolation. Mm-hmm. So when you look at CCS, is has a potential of taking emissions from industrial plant emissions, but is also taking the CO2 out of hydrogen when it's produced as a blue hydrogen, and therefore produce hydrogen at scale, which can be used as a fuel switch by the industry. And the development of the CCS projects that Scott mentioned will be an enabler of both. Mm-hmm. And then somehow we are going towards, I think, a period of a little bit of, I think, uncertainty, but in a positive way, because the various solutions will coexist and will find their way into a much more diversified portfolio of technology solutions. So we can look at the hydrogen like the panacea, and let's do hydrogen to everything, because electrification is much more efficient from a thermodynamic perspective. Yeah. But you cannot do everything with the electrification, and sometimes hydrogen is instead the answer. So there will be this mix of solutions, and all of them have, some more than others. All of them has a potential to accelerate from an innovation perspective, and by that I mean to reduce the cost, because hydrogen is still quite expensive, both blue but also green even more at the moment, right? Mm-hmm. But as we've seen with the renewable industry, with offshore wind, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I think the cost was twice as much what it is now. So the opportunity to accelerate fast and to drive a cost reduction down fast is high in all of this technology, and it can happen in 3 ways in my way. In my view, one is scale, and the other is skill, and the third is technology innovation, in the real sense of research and innovation. Because scale enables to do a lower unit cost by doing more. Skill enables to improve the processing while you're doing it, because you learn by doing. And then innovation is the one that can probably change the game and make that a big jump of 20% or 30% or even more cost reduction in a short amount of time. And we need to invest in all of them. So deliver at scale, learn while we do and improve it, and leverage that deployment project to develop a new technology innovation at the same time. And that will also open the door for export and skills, because we think about the jobs we mentioned before in terms of delivering, in terms of deploying, which is very, very important. But the whole supply chain of oil and gas and renewables and the nascent supply chain of hydrogen and CCS, with innovation, create the condition for a potential export of technology, in addition of the hydrogen or the commodities, which I think is a very important potentiality for the UK.
Yeah, no, I think a great answer in there. I think Andy, keen to come to you on this one now as well, from a slightly different perspective, because obviously in the sharp end of this, you're trying to make sure that you get the right people in the right time in the right place, and all of this new technology that's coming along, and the interdependency is incredible. It really is. That's what Lucas just sort of outlined there, I think. And how are you reading the runes on this one? How are you going to work out how to sort of deliver services, in terms of workforce development at the right pace to the right people, when it is such a sort of quickly moving picture?
Well, I guess we're going to do this together, aren't we, Claire? That's the, this is the modus operandi. I think, if you think about success and what does success look like, I think generally the industry being seen, the energy industry being seen as progressive and attractive, particularly through the eyes of young people, is what we're aiming for here, because this will be going on, for infinity. There is an awful lot of capacity that we have to attract into the sector. I think we talk about the North Sea transition deal. We will be measured very much on the success of the North Sea transition deal, because that is where we have the majority of the workforce, and that is where we can see collaboration to create jobs and fulfill the demands of renewables. But I'm also acutely aware that key sectors that have demonstrated significant growth, and again we talk about offshore wind a lot, but if we're building production capability through strategic investment, we've seen 3 or 4 very high profile announcements on the East Coast in the last couple of months. These are very labor intensive. Blade facilities are labor intensive operations. There is a significant headcount required. That's another capacity issue, as is mobilization bases and assembly, cable manufacture. This is a very labor intensive industry. It's also a very land hungry intensive industry, which is another issue. And coupled with, building 2 or 3 gigaplants at scale to support the electric vehicle rollout in the UK, these are capacity challenges, again, which need to be addressed. The other point I just wanted to make is, in terms of deals, success probably needs to look like how the collaborative effort fulfills the objectives in government's eyes of a number of deals. So how does what we do in the North Sea transition deal manifest itself in success with the offshore wind sector deal? There's a lot of very positive and proactive dialogue at the moment about how the transition deal, how the offshore wind sector deal and others actually demonstrate success, for UK PLC. So I'd like to think that the energy industry is seen as attractive by younger people. We meet the capacity demands, but we also demonstrate how collectively we can deliver on the targets and some of the objectives through the deals, respectively.
Yeah, no, and I think, again, we just can't get away from those interdependencies, even in the skills space. And I think you're right that there is a very strong linkage between those deals. And I think it's something that we all have to keep a kind of eye on, is that, one, we don't want to double count. For one, which I think is really, really important, but 2, that let's make sure that what we're doing is supporting that wider deal structure, because there really is no merit in not doing that. Luca, you took us on to sort of export opportunities and internationalism, and we've got a couple of questions in the inbox here, which I'm going to try and summarise to try and sort of bring them together a little bit. David Scrimmager has asked us one around about opportunities for inward investment by international technology companies. He's talking about Holland and Germany having deep experience and research knowledge in the hydrogen sector, which could help accelerate the energy transition in the UK. Now, the other part of that question, I guess, if I go to my own kind of framework of knowledge, is around developing, both green and blue hydrogen in parallel, because there will be different markets for both and different demands for both. Again, how do we manage that? Again, that feels like a bit of a circle to square. Is that how do we manage those in parallel production processes, and how do we make that messaging clear internationally to make sure that we do make the most of kind of inward investment opportunities?
An easy question. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't put it in, it was David.
No, the export opportunity, and David question about hydrogen is very topical, because there's a lot of hydrogen investment happening in Europe, and part of that is about hydrogen consumption. And in that sense, it might be a market for UK-produced hydrogen if we can connect to it. But others is hydrogen production and or technology innovation, which is another area of competition. So where will the industrial investment go to create a new hydrogen technology where the conditions are better? And the conditions are better either because of economic incentive or economical ecosystem around it, or because of natural advantages or location advantages. Clearly, when it comes to blue hydrogen, as you mentioned it, UK continental shelf has a lot of storage potential for CO2, which makes it a great place to invest and develop blue hydrogen, which requires CO2 capture and storage more than other countries. It also is an opportunity to import CO2, and I don't see Scott anymore. I'm not sure if he's still with us, but I'd like to get also the view from the regulator in terms of importing CO2 from other countries, because the storage location we have in the UK can accommodate a century of production of CO2 from most of Europe. whereas other countries don't have that natural advantage. So I think there's a link there and an opportunity to maximize the natural resources that comes from the wind, for example. How can we use wind to produce hydrogen and maybe connect to what in Europe has been started to be developed as the European hydrogen backbone for potential export, because that's where the demand is. But also combining that with the regulatory framework and the incentive mechanism, the market structure that can attract technology innovator and technology deployment of hydrogen and CCS in the UK. So natural resources are strong in the UK, and in Scotland they're not enough. We need to act on both sides of the equation, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you've helped me in my job here, because you've almost teed up. John McLean had asked this very question around would we be looking to perhaps import other countries' CO2? So you've teed that one up for Scott.
Yeah.
Can you talk us about the regulatory structures perhaps involved in this, and if you could address the sort of what's your current thinking on green and blue hydrogen? Is it the same regulatory structure? Is it something different as well? But yeah, the key question that came from John was, would we be looking to import, and is there a licensing
Sure.
that can accommodate that?
So I am here, and apologies you can't see me. I'm having bandwidth issues that are preventing my camera from working. But yeah, happy to answer that. So the North Sea, and the reason I use the UK continental shelf is because my colleagues in East Irish Sea, and you'll get upset because you think we've forgotten about them. But the sea around the UK is a wonderful asset. We've got some of the windiest conditions, and we've got some of the best geological storage globally, and hence we're really well primed as an energy country in terms of wind and carbon capture and storage. Yes, in many of the carbon capture and storage licenses that we have, that we've received and we're working on, potential import of CO2 in its dense phase by ship is part of the concept, recognizing that we are gifted with large storage ability and potentially an opportunity for the UK there. It's seen by some as not popular, so carbon capture and storage has potential risks, and some people do see the importing of more CO2 as a risk. So I'm just being completely honest. It's not seen by some as a great opportunity, yet it is seen by others as a great opportunity. In terms of the regulatory piece around hydrogen, the regulatory system in the UK was never set up really with energy integration in mind. I'll be honest. It was set up with silos of energy system, wind, oil and gas. It was never designed really to integrate. And that's one of the things that we are working on with the colleagues that I've spoken about and the other regulators at the moment. And what we rely on are projects coming to us saying, can you help us? We want to do this. Who does this? So, hydrogen pipelines, we've been looking at who regulates hydrogen pipelines, who regulates offshore hydrogen generation. These are all live questions, all being worked by regulators at the moment. Blue hydrogen, a little bit easier because it's tied to incumbent oil and gas and carbon capture and storage infrastructure. Green hydrogen, much less obvious because it's a burgeoning and brand new technology that's never had to be regulated or legislated for.
No, I think that's such a great answer. Thank you, Scott, and really, really interesting to hear that thought process. I think all regulators go through those phases where there's an inflection point in industries. I remember it very much when I was in broadcasting, and then telecoms operators became the purveyors of and creators of content, and we had to have very similar type conversations as what's fit for purpose in this new era. Very interesting. I've got quite a difficult question that's come in, but I'm genuinely interested in it because I think it raises some very interesting issues in here, which is from Barney Brennan, and he said, much of the North Sea infrastructure is decades old and beyond its design life, which I guess doesn't necessarily mean it's beyond its useful life, does it? It says, how clear are we that infrastructure can genuinely be repurposed for hydrogen and CCUS? Or is there a danger that we're deferring decommissioning costs here? So I think it's a very interesting conversation. Scott, I'm actually going to come to you first again on that. I know you just spoke last, but would you mind giving us some thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So where an asset or a piece of infrastructure has got a genuine repurposing life, deferring decommissioning is not a bad thing. you know, for many reasons. So that's not a bad thing. And yes, you know, many of the bits of infrastructure in the North Sea were actually given a design life of 25 years. But many of them are still there 20 further years beyond that. So just because something has a design life, if it's properly maintained, properly cared for, inspected, etc., the design life can exceed that. And often when you find that even now, looking at pipelines and what we call pigging pipelines to determine are they good for future service, some of them have actually been stored underwater, flooded with inhibited seawater when their oil and gas lifespan came to an end, and now they're being revisited to check whether they will serve, and they're proving to be in very good condition. So if something's been properly looked after, it can well exceed its design life. And that's part of a lot of the work that's going on in some of the things that I've talked about in my slides, where companies are saying, right, this piece of infrastructure has a value, let's inspect it with its new purpose in mind and decide. Some of the bits of infrastructure will be good, other bits will require new bits of infrastructure installed next to it, so et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't necessarily concern me. And one thing we are very good at in the oil and gas sector is inspecting and understanding the condition of equipment in a harsh North Sea environment, and also being able to look after it.
It's great, and it's one of those ongoing operations and maintenance sort of hidden jobs, isn't it, that people very rarely kind of understand about.
Yeah, and I can see Andy nodding, because that's clearly where we have the skills and the transferable skills as we move into the transition. So I'm sorry you can't see me, but I can still see all of you.
And if I could just add to that, I mean, okay, we've seen in offshore wind, we've seen an incredible acceleration by way of technology scale up in turbine size. I remember starting out designing the assets in Blythe, and I thought the engineers were getting quite carried away when we were talking about a 15 megawatt drivetrain stand 10 years ago, and here we are. And we've seen innovation on existing assets with the Beatrice demonstrator in the North Sea. Now, that's not to say that the existing assets would accommodate current turbine size, but this has happened before. And there is a strong degree of applicability of existing safety standards, which can be transferred. So a lot of good work and a lot of experience is already out there, I would say.
Yeah. No, and very, very important. We're coming now close to the end. I've got one more quick question I want to just sneak in, that's coming from Andrew Smith, and in asking the question, he says, do we agree that combinations of health and safety tech and improving project bottom line are rare? And then goes on to give the example of the Xylem rescue vessel as one of good practice, which actually does do both, actually saves costs and improves health and safety. Brian, I'm going to come to you very quickly first on this one. What's your kind of view of that? Can you tick more than one box with innovations and technology and get both health and safety benefits as well as bottom line benefits? What's your view?
Yeah, I believe so. Just coming back to the conversation we've just had, on pipelines and offshore infrastructure, there is also the kind of moral circular economy reuse of those materials, and the projects that are planning to do that are not necessarily looking at delivering that at least cost. Obviously, they've got to deliver health and safety, but they are thinking about materials reuse and the impact on the environment too. So I think people are mindful of that, and that's a reasonable example. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Luca, any thoughts from you on that, and in terms of where you see things like hitting more than one variable in terms of project innovations?
I am a big fan of the and as opposed to the versus. So I don't think there is a trade-off between improving safety and reducing cost, or improving safety and improving performance. I think they need to be pursued together, and I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. So. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and we've got lots of examples, I think, of the wind hoist system as well, isn't there? Yep. That we've seen in terms of phenomenal increases in safety and as a result of that. Right, I have been given a very strict time schedule by Judith Patton, as everybody would expect. So I am now at 12:29, and so I'm here at this point having to wrap up. I think we've had a brilliant discussion. I've got so many notes from this, but trying to sort of noodle through. There is some devil in the detail. I think that's what we've kind of come to, is that there's changes required charge and that regulatory structure and trying to drive collaboration is going to need a bit of effort. You know, we are going to have to think about how to do that, but it's got to be worth it because the prizes are huge at the end of the day. You know, we are aiming towards one energy sector, you know, and using this moment to optimize the kind of infrastructure, including reusing existing infrastructure, you know, to stay true to sort of circular economy and to, you know, that emissions reduction mantra that we all need to work at, and that kind of new framework, obviously, that Scott had talked about a lot. I think one of the key things or two key things I think I want to leave us with is one, gifted with such great natural resources, you know, including that ability to be able to develop CCS because of what's gone before. And it feels like that very natural evolution to be able to be part of that global, you know, frontier of countries who are developing that technology along with hydrogen in all of its different forms. But most importantly, that interdependence. That's the thing that I think has come through from this whole session, is that we're all working together like cogs in a machine at the moment, and that's how we have to keep working, is to try and just make sure that we get the gearing right. You know, where one of us can, you know, we're one of the sort of legacy sectors, as in either oil and gas or renewables, is best to take the lead. Let's make that happen. You know, and in other sort of situations where that interdependence is absolutely crucial in bringing together both, you know, policy, technology, and behaviours that will help us genuinely drive that energy transition. And we've obviously identified some brilliant opportunities in the course of this conversation. We could, of course, go on all afternoon, as is always the thing with these kind of sessions when you've got a fantastic panel like this one assembled. But at this point, I have to simply give my thanks to you all. Thank you for coming with your great ideas, your great thinking, and being brave enough to open yourself up to questions from the audience too. I hope that we've managed to cover as much as possible in the short time that we've had. But thank you very much to my panel, Scott, Luca, Andy, Bryony. Thank you again.